Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Health and Wellness Leader Lounge. I'm Inmar, the founder of GoAdora, and today I'm joined by Jed, CEO of Auxilius Pharma, working at the intersection of life sciences, strategy, and execution. Jed, great to have you here.
Thank you, Inmar, and welcome everybody. I'm really glad to be here with you today.
Welcome. Would you mind introducing yourself in your own words?
Absolutely. My name is Jed Litwiniuk. Well, my real name is Jędrzej, but it's a Polish name. I'm originally Polish, and so I live in the US now. And Jędrzej would be too complicated to pronounce and to remember, so I just go by as Jed. It just makes life easier for everybody. And I'm indeed one of the two co-founders of Auxilius Pharma. The company has been established roughly 6 years ago. In my previous professional life, I've worked for corporate finance. I worked for VC companies. I worked as an M&A manager, investing in healthcare and life science companies. So I guess this is what allowed me to understand this side of the business. And I also got a public health degree from Columbia University, New York, that helps me to appreciate more the medical clinical side of this industry. So I'm trying to, marry these two perspectives, financial and medical or population health perspective.
Thank you for introducing yourself. Jed, can you walk me through what your roles look like today as a CAO and what's like a typical week looks like for you?
Well, we are still a fledgling company. We are a pretty small organization. So sadly or luckily, I got to wear a lot of hats. I wear a hat of a CEO, but I would also say that I'm the CFO and oftentimes COO, because in a small team, you cannot afford the luxury of focusing just on a one narrowly defined role. You got to be responsible for much more. And being the CEO, really, you are responsible for everything that your colleagues are not responsible for. And I say it with a smile on my face because really it is fun. And my week is quite intense, but it's not a crazy type of hours. I'm not working 100 hours a week. As it's true, my work really doesn't stop. So when I turn off my computer, it doesn't mean that I stop responding to emails or I stop mulling start over. But being at the age that I am, I'm 46, almost 46. I got two daughters and recently a dog and a wife. I just recognize how important it is to keep a balance between my work and my life. And I'll tell you what, most of the time, I'm really able to keep it. So my works are really not that different from anybody else having a professional job. This job is what you make it to be. I don't have a job description that tells me what my duties are and what they aren't. What I have instead is a vision of what I want our company to be, which direction it needs to go. So on daily or weekly basis, I just monitor, which direction we are headed, what is important to accomplish this week. And I'm just trying to focus on these objectives, and that dictates what specific activities I'm involved with at that moment. Obviously, there is a lot of recurring stuff, like I'm in charge of finances of my companies on daily basis. I need to work with accounting. I need to deal with making wires, accepting invoices, working with our legal or tax advisors. So that's kind of an ongoing and predictable part of the job. But the R&D or clinical part of what we do is much less predictable. And sometimes there are periods where we focus heavily on drug development activities. So we work a lot with labs. We work a lot with manufacturer of the drug. Then when the time comes to conduct a clinical study, our focus shifts and it's all hands on deck to make sure the clinical study goes well. And then when it's fundraising time, as you can imagine, this is the main activity I'm devoting my time to. And so it really does not get boring.
Thank you very much, especially that you are taking the time and jumping on a podcast. You spent many years in life science, strategy, and advisory roles. Looking back, what intentionally pulled you into this space? What ultimately led you to step as a CEO? Was there like a story, a small story from back then that you pulled you in that space?
I would say two parts of the answer to this question. One, what led me to becoming the CEO. I kind of always knew I wanted to be a CEO. It was kind of obvious for me. Obviously, that took me some time to become ready for this role. But before I set up this company, I worked as a salaried person for various corporations. And I loved some of those jobs, some not so much. But what always bothered me is that, I'm just a little element in a bigger mechanism, and that there is always a boss above me. And usually there is always a boss above this boss. And I guess, knew that I wanted to be the person who is ultimately accountable. Now, what led me to choose this specific industry and to launch Auxilius Pharma? Back, I'd say probably 15 years ago, I started working for a healthcare company in Poland. They run a network of clinics, hospital diagnostic centers, and such. And initially, I was really green. I had very little understanding of how medicine works. And I spent a lot of time talking to doctors, to medics who were kind enough to explain things to me step by step. And I just started falling in love with this line of activities. It's just infinitely interesting and rewarding because at the end, it's all about serving patients' needs. And I don't need to remind everybody that we all will become patients. So this is important and rewarding. So this was my selection of the general activity. But then I started working for a VC fund. And so my job was to look for businesses with large growth potential. And I realized, analyzing dozens of different business models, that healthcare provision is a very local business. What do I mean by that is that if you run a hospital, and I had an episode of running for 2 years an orthopedics and spine surgery hospital, which was an excellent clinic. They offered really top-notch quality services. We did fine financially, but you really cannot scale it. I mean, if you have one hospital in Warsaw, maybe you can open another one, but it will never be a global business. Whereas what I realized, that in life science, in drug development, it is always global. If you work on a new drug or new version of a drug like we do, it is a global product. It has a potential of being marketed and accessible everywhere. And so just this growth perspective, it's just so much bigger than with a locally based, service-based business. So that was my thought process.
Since a long time ago, you know you're gonna be a CEO, you're gonna be the boss.
Yeah, I kind of did. I guess as a young person, it probably was more ego driven. With age, it has changed. I guess I don't care that much about ego, but what I care about is the liberty of doing what I feel is right, liberty of doing what I feel I want to do, and also taking ultimate responsibility for it. I just feel that this is a package that works for me.
I found that very interesting that you already know at a young age that you want to be a CEO and be a very successful. It's very interesting, and you made that. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
I am proud of where we are right now, but to be sure, we still have a way to go to achieve our true potential. And when I was a kid, in my childish visions, I envisaged myself as a CEO of a bank. So that has evolved over time. I realized there are more exciting activities than being CEO of a bank, but I guess the CEO element stayed.
Beautiful. So for me, it was a little bit hard to understand what Auxilius Pharma. For those people who are not familiar with Auxilius Pharma yet, how would you explain it in simple terms?
Of course, there is a very easy way to explain what we do. We optimize existing drugs. That is the shortest way to put it. A lot of drugs which are currently used have been developed quite some time ago, 20, 30, sometimes 50 years ago. And a lot of these drugs are still being used and are being widely used. They are popular drugs, but the technology we have at our disposal now is just so much better than it used to be. And so that creates plenty of opportunities to take existing drugs and add value to them, make them better, frame it in a simplest way, or to add clinical value to them, to be a little bit more fancy. At the end, the idea is to make them easier to take for patients, more convenient, more efficacious, or more safe, or preferably all of it at once. This is what we call value-added medications industry.
Thank you.
Does it make sense?
I like the way how you frame it. It's in a very simple way. From your perspective, like where do pharma and biotech company most often underestimate the gap between strategy and real world execution? What do you think about that? Like from your perspective?
Well, that's a good one because it's funny because everybody that actually knows this industry realizes that drug development takes much more time and costs much more money than initially assumed. But still, when you make your initial assumptions, you fall short of the reality. And because you hope that, well, it took other people 10 years, but I'll do it in 5. But usually, I guess it doesn't work that way unless you're extremely lucky. And also, when you present your plans to your partners, investors, you cannot be overly conservative because then no one will like what you do. No one will invest into your company. I guess you need to be upbeat and optimistic about the plans and do your best to deliver them. And if things go slower, well, you just deal with it. That's part of the game. So I guess the time and cost factor is the answer to your question. That said, the very reason why companies like ours can operate and be successful is that large pharmaceutical companies are even slower. They have almost infinite resources at their disposal, but they tend to go extremely slow. And so companies like ours can deliver results, can develop drugs at early stages at faster pace and at much lower budget than big pharmaceuticals companies do. And so the ecosystem works the way that people like us do the initial work, the risk, the assets, develop them until a certain point, and then we tend to hand it over to the bigger organizations to finish the development up to snuff, up to regulatory requirement. And they tend to be pretty good at it.
Highly regulated environment like healthcare, what tend to slow decision making the most? Is it like risk, uncertainty, or interly alignment, or how is it?
I think risk is the major factor here because I'll be talking about drug development, pharmaceutical industry. It has different dynamic and set of regulations than healthcare provision industries such as hospitals or clinics. And so for the regulators and for the pharmaceutical industry, the safety is the most critical thing. We don't want patients to get hurt. We don't want patients to die. And so, in fact, when a regulatory agency evaluates any drug, this is the first thing they are looking at. Is it safe? Is it toxic? And only then is it efficacious. And, there is a price for that. There is tons of studies you need to complete to make sure and to demonstrate that a drug is safe, that it's not toxic, that it's not cardiotoxic, that it's not genotoxic, that it doesn't cause any developmental impairments. And this process is very long and costly. And oftentimes this process kills drug development projects, but I'd say rightly so, because if a drug has a potential to be toxic, we should not get it approved. And so does it slow down things? Does it increase the cost? Yes. Can it be avoided? Probably not.
I didn't thought about that in that way. Now, as a CEO, balancing strategy, clients, terms, and stockholders. What currently feel like the biggest mental or strategic bottleneck for you personally?
It's a good one. But what I can tell you, Inmar, is that I always believed in uh, creating a team uh, which I can trust and which can support me. And I feel that we've done a pretty good job. So, for instance, I got a supervisory board. This is a team of people who oversee our work. And this body, we recently closed a financial round. So we got new members on the supervisory team. It's a 5-person body now. And I've worked with most of these people for a really long time. And there is a big capital of trust. And so I can imagine that easily relationship with a supervisory board can be stressful, but it's not the case in our company because I just know that I have the trust of these people and I do my best not to let them down. And so this relationship is, thanks to that, supportive rather than stressful. And same principle goes to a relationship with my colleagues. And we are growing and expanding. Part of my effort is to adding new persons to our circle with whom I can work, who can work with other team members. And I always believe that if you are able to manage and nourish relationships with the closest circle of people, I don't know how many people it is, 5, 10, or 15, then you've done a nice job and it will go a long way. And this has been my main principle.
Do you have any other biggest problem also in the business other than the team or
Of course, Inmar. And let me give you a few, I guess, most important aspects. And so one is financing. We've been around for 6 years. Most of this time we've been in a fundraising mode. And usually it took much longer to raise sufficient funding to ensure and safeguard our development. It's been always a concern of mine. Now we are in a fortunate position that we have closed a financial round. We have 2 new great investors on board, and that gives us ability to continue and advance with our program. But there are new ideas with the assets we are developing. There is a lot of what they call life cycle management options or label extension options. To put it simple, the asset we are developing in the indication of chronic stable angina has a lot of potential in other therapeutic indications. However, to demonstrate it, you need to run extra clinical studies, and that costs extra money. So we have really nice idea, and we have reasons to believe they are good ideas, but still, to make them a reality, we will need to find extra financing, and it's just never a simple task. So that's always a bottleneck. One thing I'd say, and I guess it's particularly pertinent to younger or early stage entrepreneurs, is to properly manage the family situation, because developing a company takes a long time. As we discussed, it takes longer than you might expect at the beginning. When you tell your spouse that I'm gonna quit my full-time day job and start developing a startup company, your spouse may like it, but they should understand, and you should also understand it, that it's a long game and that initially you're not gonna make any money or very little money, and that, it takes patience and properly communicating it to your family that, well, I'm going to take a dip in terms of my salary and it may take a long time. Yes, at the end, there is potentially a huge reward, but in the meantime, I'm going to be making less money. And so if you are not aligned on that with your spouse, that spells trouble. So this is one area where alignment is, in my view, critical.
I find that also very interesting and very important to find always the right person always there and support you. Do you think that other companies they struggle also with the same problem?
They will never tell you, but I'm deeply convinced, yes, it's the case. When you read press releases of the companies, when you look at their sites or LinkedIn profiles. It's an uninterrupted chain of successes. There is only good news, right? But we both know it's just not possible. Things don't work that way. And obviously, it doesn't make sense to, when you close a financial round, that's something to share with the world. That's good news. But if an investor turns you down, and in reality, it's 95% cases the situation, there is no need, obviously, to communicate it to everybody. It's not news, but this is how, your days look like. There is 10 bad news and one good news. And ultimately, only the good news matters, because it doesn't matter if I talk to 100 investors and they have not decided to invest with me. I mean, too bad for them. What matters is the one who has trusted you and provided you with the capital and the ability to develop your idea. But I'm pretty sure most entrepreneurs deal with the same set of problems. Maybe there are some exceptions. Well, sometimes you have this story that a CEO or a board member of a huge Fortune 500 company steps aside and creates his own venture. Immediately, he's joined by a team of people who've been working with him or her. Immediately there is a $500 million or however much investment. As maybe there are stories like that. Maybe sometimes the start is very easy, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty rare.
There is something that crossed my mind right now. When you are saying that you are looking for an investor, how do you find them, or they find you? It comes through friends or connection, or they come to you and tell you we want to invest, or how is it?
No, it's almost never that way. If you get an email from claiming that, well, we are an investment group and we are interested in your company, it's almost always a scam. Okay. In my view, it's always your hard work finding investors rather than the other way around. And there is a number of ways to do that. There are conferences where you can meet investors. There are VC organized or sponsored events, and they certainly matter. However, my experience is that your personal and extended network is your strongest tool, because when you know someone and the person has some level of trust to you, at least the person will talk with you, will hear you out, and will he or she invest, depending if he or she likes the company, but at least you will have the attention. And maybe if they don't invest, maybe they will put you in touch with someone else. Whereas if you don't know, if you don't have access to the decision makers, it's much harder to get access to them, to actually get their attention and make them start trusting you. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's happening. We also have a few investors which I previously have not known, but majority of our investors are people with whom I had one form or another of professional relationship in the past.
Perfect. Thank you, Jed. I will ask you our last question for today. If you could
Yeah.
leave our audience with one thought about leadership, clarity, and building sustainable impact in healthcare, what would it be?
Well, one thought I have about leadership is that you should always do more than you are comfortable doing. If you think you've given enough, think again, because there is probably more than you can give. Building sustainable healthcare business is a very broad question. Building a viable business is hard. And I believe you should strongly focus on every energy which you have on making sure that it works. And only then you can worry how sustainable it is. I'm not saying you should do anything unethical, of course not, but I'm saying it's a hard word out there, and surviving is hard enough. And when you are fledgling and early stage, you should just make sure that you make it through this difficult period, and then you can become more sustainable.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing all that, Jed. For everyone is listening and want to know more about Auxilius Pharma, where they can find it? Do you have any social media or how they can reach out to
Of
you?
course, we got our webpage, which is www.auxiliuspharma.com. We also have our LinkedIn webpage. Inmar, if you can, put it in writing on the video, that would be great if there is such a possibility. Because it's easy to misspell Auxilius Pharma.
Sure, I will put the website over here and also your LinkedIn and the social media that you have on your website, and so everyone can see it and click on it. And I will also put it on the below the comment section so everyone knows about your company and about you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And thanks for everyone who's listening, and we'll see you again in the next episode of Health and Wellness Leader Lounge.